Good evening. I am Karen Taylor, Programme Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, and I'm so pleased to welcome both our in-person and our online audience here this evening. We have a real Scottish treat for you. Tonight's programme is, of course, Mackintosh, Illuminated, Hill, House and Mack at the Willow, the enduring influence of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Margaret Macdonald. And of course our speaker is Philip Long, Chief Executive of the National Trust of Scotland, OBE. Tonight's programme is presented in partnership with the National Trust for Scotland Foundation, USA, and the American Scottish Foundation. And I'd like to thank them for all their help. Now, we also have a special window display to celebrate tonight's programme by our artistic window curator, Thomas Donoghue, which I encourage you to look at before you leave this evening. It's outside on the West 44th Street. For those of you who are less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society is a non-profit organisation that was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of New York City. Today, our 240-year-old organisation continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our various educational and cultural programmes. These include the General Society Library, for which of the in-person audience you are sitting in this evening, our John M. Mossman Lock Museum, which you are welcome to visit at the conclusion of the talk, which is up there on the balcony, and our tuition-free Mechanics Institute. But finally, our lecture series, a lecture series that's been going since 1838. I'm so pleased to have an opportunity to introduce our speaker tonight, Philip Long. Philip Long joined the National Trust for Scotland in 2020. Previously, he was founding director of the V&A Dundee, which opened in 2018 as a new international museum, with a mission to enrich people's lives through the understanding of the designed world. Prior to V&A Dundee, Mr. Long was senior curator at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. His academic specialisation is in historic and contemporary Scottish and wider British art and design, on which he has curated many exhibitions and written widely, including on Charles Rennie Mackintosh. He received an OBE in the New Year's Honour List in 2020 for services to culture and heritage. What a pleasure to introduce to you Philip Long. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's very nice to be introduced to someone who writes wildly about art and design. I'm going to put that into my biography. And what a pleasure and a privilege to speak in this amazing room and learn about this august institution. I'm quite sure Mackintosh would have been in very good company here. So what I want to do this evening is to, in a way, tell you a story. I think it's a story really at the moment that's really only known in fragments through quite fragile works of art and design. It's really a story of how two great talents came together and developed amid really what was the dynamism of late 19th century Glasgow, when Glasgow was known as the workshop of the world, and how together those two created an architectural and artistic vision that has become known and admired around the world. Their names were Margaret Macdonald and Charles Rennie Mackintosh. They met at the world-famous Glasgow School of Art in the late 19th century. They married and they became together one of the most extraordinarily creative couples that Scotland has ever known. And my story also begins, and it will feature throughout, one of Mackintosh's great works of architecture, designed by Charles and worked on together by him and his wife to make what I believe is one of the great modern houses of the 20th century. Now, as Chief Executive of the National Trust for Scotland, and I'm going to tell you more about what the Trust is a little later on, I'm not really supposed to have favourites among all the properties that we are proud to look after, but if I was to single one out, then I think it would have to be this masterpiece, the Hill House. Mackintosh was also a wonderful draftsman, an artist, and I hope you agree that this fantastic drawing by him really shows that artistry off quite brilliantly. Writing of it, Mackintosh said, "Here is the house. It's not an Italian villa, an English mansion house, a Swiss chalet, or a Scotch castle. It's a dwelling house." And for much of its history, it has been a lived-in house. It was lived in by successive families until the 1950s, then eventually it passed into the care of the National Trust for Scotland in the 80s. And we are really proud to have it. But despite his fame and his influence on designers around the world, his architectural work is rare. It's limited to a short period in time, from the late 1890s until the early 1910s, and really only in and around Glasgow. His approach to design really was extraordinary for the time, and his aesthetic, where in his interiors, all the elements from floor coverings to furniture to wall decoration were designed and orchestrated into a complete competition. That aesthetic, it restricted his clients to those who were really willing to bend to that artistic intention. But for the Hill House, Mackintosh did have such a client, a publisher by the name of Walter Blackie, and the result still takes our breath away today. This is the entrance hall. The main entrance down there is ahead of you, and from which you enter into this enveloping environment within which every detail, the hanging light fittings, the pattern carpets, the very precisely placed furniture, the stenciled walls, the exposed ceiling beams, all play a part in contributing to his overall design. From that dark entrance hall, you make your way into the white drawing room with its views down across Helensburgh to the River Clyde. But it's not the outdoor scene that we're drawn to in the room. In this exquisite room and throughout Mackintosh's interiors in the house, he meticulously arranges the space and the way it's lit. Part of the composition are sculptural furniture designs, stenciled textiles, wall decorations, all of which are individual, all of which find their inspiration and originality, I would say, through their combination of geometric structure and organic form. That sense of serenity and harmony and balance really reaches its height when one goes upstairs into the white bedroom on the first floor. Here we see one view of that room, flanked by these white painted built-in wardrobes as one of Mackintosh's famed ladder-back chairs, placed in a niche and acting as a lattice through which stenciled and stylized platforms can be seen as they climb their way up the wall. The house is a treasure in its architectural form and its exquisite interiors. It's largely complete still furnishings. It's a very rare example of a complete work by the designer, and it's remained largely as it has been since it was completed some 120 years ago. But other work by Mackintosh has not fared so well. His avant-garde approach and the onset of the First World War meant that by the early 1910s, commissions had largely dried up, and from that time his life and the life of Margaret was largely spent outside Scotland with very few design commissions. And in the decades that followed after his death in 1928, he was overlooked until interest in his work began to revive from the late 1960s onwards. But that has not meant his work was always saved. For example, his suite of interiors for one of the tea rooms he designed in Glasgow, the Ingram Street tea room interiors, they were pulled out of a building in which they'd been fitted into back in the 1900s, pulled out of a building just before it was sold off in 1970, rescued from that building, and they still remain largely in storage ever since. And I'm sure you will only be too sadly familiar with those that know his work and have followed his story, with the absolute tragedy of the loss of his masterpiece, the Glasgow School of Art, which was badly damaged by fire in 2014, and then not long before it was due to reopen after a painstaking rebuild and restoration, was almost completely destroyed once again by fire during a second absolutely ferocious blaze in 2018. A shocking, unbelievable event. 7 years on from that, though, although it's declared that the school will be rebuilt, there's no visible sign of progress at the site. And so, ladies and gentlemen, protecting a building such as Mackintosh's Hill House, I think becomes all the more important. His influence has been great, but in fact, as I've said, his work is rare. And in Scotland, I have to confess, we have a checkered record of looking after this great designer's work. But there is an additional complexity in the preservation of a building like the Hill House, as these slides begin to reveal. And I want to say that this is not through recent neglect, certainly not by my organisation. It's the structure of the Hill House has been plagued throughout most of its existence by problems of water penetration. The weather on the west coast of Scotland, where the house is, has very high levels of rainfall. That's not helped. But the greatest problem is a consequence of Mackintosh's design, Mackintosh's choice and use of materials. Such an innovative designer. So not unusually, he was really interested in innovative construction techniques and materials. But as this photograph on the left shows particularly, where the cement-based rough cast was used to wrap the entire building, that's been a fundamental design flaw from the outset. And from as early on as the 1930s, while the Blackie family who commissioned the house still lived there, water penetration was an issue. And so a substantial part of my story to you today is to explain how we're trying to save this masterpiece. A really innovative solution has been needed, one which stops water penetration, enables the building to dry out in such a way so as not to cause further damage, and one which gives time for careful analysis of the problem, for really getting to grips with the fundamental questions of how we can serve such a building, and for that restoration to then happen. And so this first phase of solving this problem, solving the problem of the Hill House, has been to commission this extraordinary box, which there today sits over Mackintosh's design, designed by the very good designers Kermode Hope, installed in 2019. Simply, it's a steel frame covered in a stainless steel mesh that provides a protective barrier. It allows the building to be seen, to breathe, and also to dry out slowly and gradually. But before I go into that in depth, I want to tell you a bit about the National Trust for Scotland, the body that's responsible for this. We're an independent charity, and we're a non-government organisation that stands on our own 2 feet financially. It exists to care for the heritage of Scotland that's in our ownership. We have a vision, which is that nature, beauty and heritage that we care for is for everyone. And we carry out our work by looking after much of Scotland's most beautiful and historic places, such as the famous Glencoe that you can see in this slide. We were founded, we're a junior compared with this organisation, founded in 1931 by a group concerned about the conservation of Scotland's heritage, including this man, Sir James Stirling Maxwell, owner of Pollock House in Glasgow, which you can see there in the background. He led the establishment of our charity with the purpose of caring for places of historic interest and natural beauty. And today the Trust looks after 110 properties that you can come and see, and a lot more besides. 271 listed buildings, including at least 11 castles, such as the magical Craigievar Castle in Aberdeenshire, 187,000 acres of countryside, and 46 of Scotland's Munros. What's a Munro? Anyone? Mountains is a particularly Scottish term for mountains with summits over 3,000 feet. And this is Kintail, one of our places in the Western Highlands. We have some 11,000 archaeological sites, at least the ones that we know about, including here Clavacairns, which is a 4000 BC Bronze Age burial site near the battlefield of Culloden. Some of Scotland's earliest domestic architecture, such as the village of Kouros, 29 design gardens, caring for over 100,000 exotic plants. We know because a team has just catalogued them all. This is our beautiful garden of Inverview up in the northwest of the coast of Scotland. And properties that now present largely lost traditions, such as the traditional printing works of Smales, which is in the Scottish borders, where still today you can go and find out about and commission letterpress and lithographic print work. It's a working printers that we care for and continue to run. We have battlefields and birthplaces, including Culloden, there in the slide, in the image on your left, where the Jacobites' cause failed in the last pitched battle on British soil in 1746, and then on the right, the first home of Robert Burns, where he was born in 1759. And we have over 300,000 artefacts and objects of art and design, ranging from Georgian silver to masterpieces of painting, such as this portrait of General William Gordon in a silk kilt, on his grand tour in Italy by Battoni, to vernacular pieces of furniture. That's all a great responsibility, and looking after the places we're responsible for, in doing that, we want to not just care for them, but we also want to understand and share the stories of these places, of the people that brought them into being. And at the heart of the story of Hill House, which I'm now going to come back to, are these amazing figures of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his wife, Margaret Macdonald Mackintosh, who formed this extraordinary artistic partnership, working together on the architectural commissions that Mackintosh received. So, at the Trust's Hill House, for example, Margaret certainly created this exquisite gesso panel above the fireplace in the drawing room. Now, Mackintosh was a student at Glasgow School of Art. There he met Margaret Macdonald and others who had that shared interest in the latest artistic developments, whether the innovative paintings of the late 19th century artists known as the Glasgow Boys, or the great interest sweeping across the West in Japanese culture and art and design that so influenced Mackintosh's work. Margaret and her sister and fellow student Frances were also at the school, and they met there, Charles and his friend and fellow architecture student Herbert McNair. They formed a close group who famously became known as the Four, and you can see them here in this rather wonderful design, and they became intertwined through their work and marriage, Charles to Margaret and Herbert to Frances. Now, during that time, in the 1890s, the art school in Glasgow was led by the really progressive educationalist, a man called Fra Newbery. He encouraged, and in fact he required his students to work across all disciplines, whether the fine or the applied arts. And as a consequence, there was an enormous flourishing in Glasgow of artistic talent across many creative fields. And that's come to really be known as the Glasgow style, part of the international Art Nouveau movement. And Newbery, in particular, recognised Mackintosh's exceptional talent, and he commissioned the young architect, when Mackintosh was only around 30, to design a new home for the school, the Mack, as it became fondly and famously known among the generations of artists who studied there for over 100 years, with its amazing sculptural central entrance facade, great glazed studio windows, and exquisite interiors, such as its double-height library, which have become amongst the most admired architectural designs in the world, influencing generations of architects who made pilgrimages to see it, and so all the more tragic it is now lost. Mackintosh and his wife Margaret lived in Glasgow throughout these years round about 1900, and together they designed the interiors of their remarkable home. And today this has been meticulously recreated at the University of Glasgow. The building itself is a recreation, but it's furnished with the Mackintosh's own furniture, all to their design, and decorated as closely as possible to the original. These beautiful rooms give us this unique insight into the Mackintosh's home life and their very distinctive design style, distinguished by this disciplined austerity of the furnishings and the decorations, which I hope you agree, still feels so radical. But over 120 years ago, as Scotland came out of the late Victorian period, they must have been truly shocking. Now, these years from the late 1890s to around about 1910 were when Mackintosh's design career was at its peak. In that, he was supported by a small number of highly dedicated patrons, one famously a Miss Catherine Cranston. She was an extraordinarily entrepreneurial businesswoman in Glasgow at that time, the developer and owner of several tea rooms across the city. And she gave them an edge by commissioning some of the most progressive architects, artists and designers of the day to decorate them. And increasingly in that, she favoured Mackintosh. And the most ambitious and accomplished of these tea room projects for Miss Cranston was the Willow tea rooms, today still the only surviving example. In collaboration with Margaret, Mackintosh created a luxurious spectacle of the building, which gave Miss Cranston an enormous advantage over her competitors. And as with the Mackintosh's home and the Hill House, the Willow represents this single cohesive design in which every individual detail has been considered, composed in relation to the whole. Now, this was also neglected for many years, but it was recently restored and reopened in 2018 by a remarkable group who came together to do this and to redevelop it as a working tea room. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that it's now come into the National Trust for Scotland's ownership after the Trust working with the restorers' trustees after it was further threatened with closure just a couple of years ago as a consequence of the challenges that we faced through the closure of businesses through the pandemic. Now, at the Willow, and a defining characteristic of Mackintosh's work was, as I've said, the design of every element, whenever his patron permitted it. And in his tea room interiors, for example, Mackintosh would take responsibility not just for the architectural scheme, but also the furniture, the cutlery, the light fittings, down to the design of the menu. And he often worked with Margaret in this. Now, in the most progressive of European and American architecture in these years around 1900, this concept of the whole, the concept of the Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work of art, had taken hold. All design elements were to be seen of equal value, the designer applying themselves, really without prejudice, to every single detail in the wish to create this all-enveloping design that would embody their vision. And I do think that of all designers of the period, certainly in Europe, Mackintosh's interiors are the purest expression of this approach, as we can see from this other shot of the master bedroom, the white bedroom at the Hill House. But the problem with this was that while a small number were deeply committed to commissioning his work, for many this radicalism and this uncompromising approach would simply have been off-putting. And so through this and a wider range of circumstances, including the tragedy of the First World War, Mackintosh produced very little architecture after 1912. But throughout his career, he'd drawn beautifully, and thankfully, for a few final years, from 1924 until just before his death in 1928, he and Margaret settled in the south of France. And there, he dedicated himself to watercolour painting, bringing all of his flair for design and abstraction from nature to the scenes he painted in the southern French Mediterranean coast. But that's another story for another time. Let's turn back to the Hill House and one of Mackintosh's other most important patrons, the Glasgow-based publisher Walter Blackie, whose portrait here hangs in the dining room of the house today. Now, just to put this into context, by the late 19th century, this town of Helensburgh, north of Glasgow on the Clyde coast, easily reachable from the city centre by train, had become a popular location for Glasgow's most successful families to establish a home. Excuse me. Many grand houses were built most frequently in the English arts and crafts style, such as this by William Leiper, with its traditional features of high-pitched eaves, elaborate chimney stacks, and half-timber details. Walter Blackie was something different, a publisher who commissioned contemporary artists to produce his book designs. And in 1902, Blackie commissioned Mackintosh to produce this house, a mansion house for his family to live in, high up on the hillside of Helensburgh. And here it is, shortly after it was completed in 1904, quite different to Leiper's more traditional approach. Mackintosh's design, by comparison, is crisp and uniform in its external finish, and it just rids itself of conventional design features such as protective overhanging eaves. And so the overall effect is wonderfully sculptural, moulded, really severe by comparison, probably more at home in the Vienna or Prague of 1900 than the countryside outside Glasgow. But Mackintosh was a great admirer of traditional Scottish architecture, and in fact he looked back to its early, especially castellated forms as an architecture that was authentic to the country. And so I wanted to show you this slide of a detail of the Hill House on the left, and on the right the wonderful Craigievar Castle again, which was completed in the 1620s. And I think the influence of the one is clear on the other. Mackintosh has adopted this Z plan of the traditional Scottish fortified tower. He's jammed a stair turret between the wings, and that turret is protected by the slated conical roof. Mackintosh's window detailing too is as varied in form as in the early castle. And overall, the Hill House shares with the castle a simplicity of design at the lower levels and a complexity of forms at the upper and rooftop levels. And most importantly for our conservation story, the Hill House has an external finish of cement and aggregate, which we know in Scotland as a hurled finish, traditional in the country to protect against the extremes of our weather and used in our architecture for hundreds of years. Many other architects, such as the English designers Voysey and Bailey Scott in these two slides, also used cement renders for their designs increasingly in the 19th century. This more sophisticated Portland type of cement, which had been developed, gave new properties of rigidity and waterproofing, which was attractive to architects whose aesthetic approach could develop as a consequence. But you'll notice in these buildings the protective elements remain. The overhanging eaves, the protective roofing over bay windows. So I wanted to show you a couple of other buildings, Scottish buildings, by two Scottish architects, Mackintosh on the left, and then Lorimer, Sir Robert Lorimer on the right. This is a house, the Hill of Target Mansion House, which is also in our care. It's almost exactly the same date as the Hill House, early 1900s. But here you can see eaves project all around, windows are protected by impervious stonework, chimney stacks are pedimented, and the rainwater ironwork, that wonderful sculptural rainwater ironwork, is designed to deal with, I'm afraid to say, Scotland's pretty wet climate. At the Hill House, the technical advances that were offered by this use of Portland cement helped to free the hand of the designer to one of much greater self-expression. And without doubt, Mackintosh's work is the most progressive, and it seems to anticipate the characteristics of modernist architecture that was to follow into the 20th century. We see chimney stacks with cement rendering applied up and over the top of their vertical forms, rendering applied into the horizontal sills of window details. The whole thing is encased, if you like, in a continuous application of render. New approaches that make his architectural approach radical by comparison, but a new approach that was really untested. And Helensburgh on the west coast of Scotland, as this slide shows with the areas in blue, is one of the wettest parts of the UK. And it's all too clear on this elevation of the house, which shows the effects of decades of rain on one of its elevations, with its patches of damp and repaired and damaged rendering. And in these details, we can see the effect of this across the house. Broken rendering exposing the underlying structure, fungal growth as a consequence inside, dry rot outbreaks in woodwork, and thermographic images there on the bottom right, showing a disturbing range of differing temperatures in the building structure, telling us damp penetration. And this is such a concern because the finishes inside the building are hand stenciled, handmade, and we can't lose this. But these challenges are not new. I mentioned earlier that the Hill House was home to several families before being acquired by the NTS in the early 1980s. And throughout these years of family ownership and then conservation body ownership, the Hill House has given this real cause for concern and needed attention as to how it can be cared for and preserved. And so work has happened across several decades to try and deal with the problems that Mackintosh's brilliant but flawed design has brought about. And this has even included slating over a wall head, the reductions of heights and chimney stacks to try and reduce water penetration. And so as a consequence, any conservation approach now needs to also take into account that the building we're responsible for isn't now quite as Mackintosh intended. And so in considering how we best restore it and care for it into the future, it's vital to be really clear about the heritage significance and what we're setting out to protect as we set out here. And at the heart of this debate as to whether the appropriate thing to do is to remove the building material that can be considered original through the need to conserve the building for the future. Do we remove this render that would have been applied? So we've been looking at this. We've been addressing the conservation of the Hill House anew since 2010. And in this in particular, we've had fantastic financial support and benefited from the research through this programme that has been run by the Getty called Keeping It Modern. It's been absolutely vital. It's helped us develop research and the sharing of similar challenges into some of the most significant modernist buildings in the world, such as the Frank Lloyd Wright Unity Temple in Chicago, the Gropius residence, the Gropius House, Mendelssohn's Einstein Tower. All of these have experienced real challenges of preserving modern monuments with innovative use of materials. And with the Getty's help, we've been able to commission conservation practices in Scotland, and they have led a broad approach, a broad group of specialists to help us really undertake our in-depth programme of research into the condition of the Hill House to consider how we can preserve this masterpiece for the future. And to take the time to do this, we've also needed to make sure that the building doesn't deteriorate further. So in considering that, we wanted to take this step of looking about how we allow the building to dry out, but not to close it off from people. So in doing this, we can help visitors to learn about the story and get close to the building to view conservation work close up. And so this idea of a permeable box was developed that would both protect the building and it would help people understand at the same time more about Mackintosh's work when visiting and more about all the challenges of conservation that we as a charity need to undertake and consider across all of our places. And so the architects, the British architects Kermode Groke were commissioned to find a design solution to the design approach of Mackintosh. And they designed this extraordinary steel and mesh structure that sits over this precious building. And here you can see back in 2017-18, that structure being erected over the house, encasing it to enable the conservation process to really get underway. And here it is, finally completed. It's a utilitarian structure in these slides, but for any of you that have visited it and have been able to visit it, I think you would also see that it is a beautifully designed structure, hung with chainmail, which prevents water getting to the building, but also allows the building to breathe and gradually, slowly dry out. And inside the box are fitted walkways. It's not simply a protective structure. These walkways allow visitors to walk around and even look right over the top of the Hill House. A bit odd if you're scared of heights, I can tell you. But it does give you a view of Mackintosh's design, which nobody had ever experienced before. And it enables people to get up and see the condition of the building and the challenge that we face. When it was launched in 2019, the great gimmick came up with allowing local school children and giving them water pistols to fire at the steel mesh to see whether the water would penetrate, and it withstood. It withstood that. And since we have been working on a research programme, understanding the building before the box was erected, with a range of digital techniques to allow us to understand where the damp areas are, where it's hot, where it's cold, and after the box has been installed. And all of this information has come together in a fantastic 3D digital model that's really now enabling us to understand the challenge that the building presents, and where in particular we're really going to have to address our efforts. So here you can see when it goes from yellow to red to yellow to green to blue, it shows the worsening areas of water penetration and damp. Now, I talked a little bit earlier on about the conservation strategy, and one of the challenges that we have also been faced with is what do we want as the outcome? And this has become a particularly interesting debate, because the box is a rather wonderful experience, see the building, and many people say to us, no, you need to keep the box, this is fantastic. But we have taken a view, I'm afraid, that the box must go, because we think the right thing to do is that we must restore the building, and restore the building to its original state that Mackintosh intended back in 1904, so people can not just enjoy the extraordinary interiors, but also the beauty and innovation of its external form. And that is our ambition, to do that by 2028. These are really important considerations for us. And this year coming, we will begin to remove the external render of the building to really allow us to get in and see what the substrate of the building looks like and how problematic that is. But I am pleased to report that the drying out that's been happening since 2019 of the box has meant that the condition of it underneath is not as bad as we thought it was. But it is still going to be an enormous and delicate task for us to undertake to make sure that this building is protected and restored for the future, for future generations to enjoy it. For the Trust, it's one of our most recognisable properties. It really stands out also in this very small portfolio of buildings designed by this world-renowned architect. And it's that gives this house such international significance. It's a building that is a complete expression of Mackintosh's design philosophy of integrating architecture and decoration and furniture, and the expression of the extraordinary creativity of this artistic couple, Charles and Margaret. It's one of the few opportunities in the world to see an original Mackintosh building, and the style that's become synonymous with them, that really gave the name to the Glasgow style, which was so influential on modern architecture overall. And so from that, we developed a greater project which has come about because we now also have responsibility for his one remaining tea room building, the Willow tea rooms. And that project we have named Mackintosh Illuminated. It's a project that goes beyond simply the conservation of the Hill House, but now with the responsibility for really his two greatest works that it is possible for the public to see. We want to lead the charge in championing the understanding of the work, and if you like, also the restoration of his reputation, which has suffered as a consequence of the loss of the art school. And especially, we want to use it to inspire new creativity. We think that as young students at the art school in the 1890s, they were there at the forefront, championing avant-garde ideas. And we know from the artists that we speak to, who went to the art school for over 120 years, what loss they feel at the loss of that building. And so we hope through this project and through working with our partners across Glasgow, including with those responsible for the art school and those responsible there for its eventual restoration, that through our ambition to illuminate Mackintosh all the more so, we can inspire new creativity for the future and deal with the state of this building and return it to the tribute that it should be to these extraordinary geniuses, Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Margaret Macdonald. Charles died in 1928 and Margaret just a few years afterwards in 1933. And I hope that you agree that the story that they made together is a wonderfully romantic one, but an extraordinary one of creativity that deserves to be better known. Thank you very much indeed for your attention this evening. And I just want to finally say thank you so much again to this amazing institution for hosting us this evening, and to the National Trust of Scotland USA Foundation for all that organisation does to support heritage such as this in Scotland, which is, after all, the world's heritage. Thank you very much.
Philip, that was absolutely terrific. It was just such one, it was a most wonderful commercial for Scotland, full stop. And two, what a wonderful conservation and restoration story with it looks like is going to be a very happy ending. So really, congratulations to you and all your colleagues, really. Thank you. We will now take some questions for our online audience. If you'd like to submit them to Meg, and she will pass them on to me. And to our in-person audience, please indicate if you have a question.
Hi, Philip. I thought I saw a radiator, and I'm fond of radiators. It's true. We have 103 of them. So I think,
yeah.
Is it steam heat? And what is your HVAC?
I think the radiator that you saw was an electric one, just trying to help dry out the space. I mean, there is a heating system, an early 20th century heating system in the Hill House. But part of the work that we will do, and which so often happens with the conservation of buildings, is that so much of the money will get spent on stuff that nobody ever sees, which is about putting in place the right environmental conditions through heating and environmental control that will finally, we hope, make sure that this building is stable for the future.
Right. And humidity is so critical.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Don't worry, get to you. I saw your hand was up.
Thank you so much. This was very enlightening. I had the great experience of having tea at the Willow tea room. There was one design element that seemed a bit different, and that was the blue and white Willow tea service, porcelain.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And I don't think that was Mackintosh design.
No. It's a much earlier design. I think, let's just say, Miss Cranston was a rather formidable patron. And although she gave Mackintosh and Macdonald extraordinarily free rein in the Willow, she was, I believe, insistent that the Willow pattern was used as the service in the tea room. But it's really appropriate. It's sort of Oriental in influence, and it's still used there today. And it just feels just right. But I'm sure if Mackintosh had his complete way, they would have also have designed the ceramics. Now, there's a lady back here whose hand went up with the black glasses on.
Okay. On my way, I'm going to ask one of the online questions. This is from Lee. Can you tell me more about the Glasgow girls that included Margaret and other most significant craftswomen?
Well, that's a big subject, and there's a very good book on the Glasgow girls based on an exhibition that was done in Glasgow quite a few years ago by an author who I remember correctly is Jude Burkhauser. I'll just say that again if you want to find out more. One of the great things about the Glasgow School of Art under the direction of Newbery was that it was a school that encouraged just as much female as male students, and they achieved extraordinary things there, whether it was people like Margaret Macdonald or Jessie M. King, and many great painters and ceramicists and so on. Made up this group who became known as the Glasgow Girls, and I suppose as a consequence of the time, their reputation and work was overshadowed by the boys. But I don't think that is the case now. And I think it was Newbery's vision that encouraged, or actually, as I said, required students at the art school to not stick to just one discipline. But if you went to do architecture, you were supposed to do painting and make ceramics and so on. That meant there was much more of a fluidity across the school's design and creative disciplines that allowed male and female students to move more so around the school and have a greater interaction. And that helped encourage that group of women that went to the art school at that time and have done so ever since. And particularly for those in the period around about 1900, became known as the Glasgow Girls.
I had two questions. The first was, you did show the photo with the fungi growing inside, but what is the overall, what is the status of the inside of the interior of the house, and how much restoration is that going to require? And then the second part to that is, obviously not knowing what's going to happen when you take off that outer layer, is there any sort of an estimate or guess of what the time frame might be?
Sure. So the interior remains very beautiful, but its condition is worrying in some places. If you were to visit it, you would see cracks in walls. You would see where we've had to do some conservation interventions to maintain the condition of the stenciling. There is mold visible in the interior of the building. And so for me, the real conservation concern is not so much one about losing the original external render. I don't think that's a problem. The real conservation concern is that the hand-painted finishes inside the rooms are saved and restored. And that particularly is crucial. It is those, in a way, that are being far more affected than the external fabric of the building, which, although it has challenged design architects and conservationists for many years, we will find a way to deal with that. But it is a much more sensitive issue dealing with the interiors. The timescale, we've got a very clear programme now set out. I think it's important to say that the box itself, of course, as I've tried to emphasise, it's part of the conservation solution. So the years of it sitting there with apparently not much else going on is absolutely intentional. It needs to dry out slowly. We can't have the building becoming too dry or the environmental conditions changing too quickly, because it will just worsen the condition. But the intention is that this year we'll begin to remove the render and get on with the conservation works. We're currently working on what the technical solution to the external render will be, and we would want by 2028, towards the end of that year, to have completed the restoration. And so I must mention that this is a very important year, because 2028 will be the 160th anniversary of Mackintosh's birth and the 100th anniversary of his death. And so we think it's a good date to target and really try and celebrate Mackintosh and Macdonald and that wider school's work, not just in Scotland, but around the world.
Right, I'm just going to take an online question and then I'll come to you. Are there any account of how Hill House was received by the surrounding community when it was built? This is from Elizabeth Online.
I think it was quite shocking to people, as was the Willow Tea Rooms in Sauchiehall Street. And if you look online, if you look up the Willow Tea Rooms, you can see it as this extraordinarily white facade in the Victorian Sauchiehall Street when it opened in the early 20th century. But it quite quickly settled into part of that landscape in Helensburgh, which really in that part of Helensburgh is characterised by large mansion houses and quite large gardens. So it didn't really encroach on anything else. The problem really for Mackintosh, and the fact that his career in a way came to quite an abrupt halt, was that people just found him difficult to work with, to commission, because his approach was so radical. There are wider reasons, really, particularly to do with the collapse of new commissioning of buildings as a consequence of the First World War. But probably the Hill House in its external form is less radical than the interiors that you see in the building.
That segues into my question, which is that I've been to museums and seen Mackintosh pieces, so I was wondering if he designed for furniture companies or other commissions so that his furniture is spread out across the world.
No, really not at all. His design was really entirely produced for one-off overall design commissions. It's not completely, and so that's the work that we tend to know. It is the case that he produced a suite of many textile designs, some of which went into commercial production. But I think that would have been the works that he designed that, in the main, were not associated with a commission directly. This very strong conceptual view that the different elements of his design would make up the whole meant that really that dominated his output. Yeah, so I'll just try and deal with that very briefly because I can see other hands. So the arts restoration of the art school has been fraught with difficulties to do with challenges around insurance claims being disputed by the insurance company, the difficulty in establishing the reason for the second fire. And so it has gone effectively into arbitration for years. And it's very, very frustrating for everybody. But my current understanding, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the art school, but my current understanding is that they hope that that situation will have been resolved within the next year to 2 years, and that by 27-28 they will be back on site with the restoration of the art school. But that's really all that I can say about that at the moment. I do hope it comes back.
Hi, good evening. I'm interested to know which material is the house constructed from underneath the render?
Yeah, so actually it's a bit of a mishmash. It's got some red sandstone, which is very friable, and when it gets wet it crumbles. When it dries out it sort of solidifies again, as well as quite a lot of brick structure. And I think that's quite revealing, because for Mackintosh it doesn't really matter what the substrate was, is my conclusion from that. What he was interested in was how he could create a form that was then given this overall sculptural sense by this application of render right across the building and all of its details. So in no way is it a fine piece of stonework underneath. And that's not unusual in relation to the sort of historic Scottish architecture that he was interested in. Something like Craigievar Castle that I showed you would have been built in quite a rubbly way, but then all of that would be lost under the application of an overall render.
Right. Some questions?
Thank you. Was there any sharing of ideas and concepts amongst Mackintosh and the other Art Nouveau architects at that time?
Very, very much so. Mackintosh's work, particularly the Willow and the Hill House, were published in one of the most important German architectural design magazines in the early 20th century. He was feted in Vienna, and he was commissioned, along with Margaret Macdonald and others, to contribute to some of the great international exhibitions that happened in Milan and in Turin and in Vienna and elsewhere. So there was a very strong exchange across the European continent. I think one of the most interesting subjects always, well, here in the States, is was there any direct relationship between Mackintosh and Frank Lloyd Wright? Because the similarities, the career periods are so comparable. And having spoken to people about this, and Frank Lloyd Wright's not someone I would pretend to know about in any sort of expert way, but it seems very likely that Frank Lloyd Wright would have known about Mackintosh's work, which was quite widely published, but it's unlikely that Mackintosh would have known about that American's work.
Right. Are there any more questions in the person? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering about other influences, because I was definitely seeing some like Bauhaus-looking things going on.
Yeah.
And even kind of like Swedish design. So,
yeah. A lot's been made of Mackintosh in that very sort of white aesthetic and quite stripped back style, that in fact it was very influential on modernist architecture that was to come. And if you look at one of the great 20th century texts on the history of design, Pioneers of Modern Design by Nicholas Pesner, he puts Mackintosh right up on a pedestal as part of this tradition that then went on to influence modernists like Gropius and Corbusier, as a consequence of Mackintosh's relationship, particularly with the Viennese designers like Hoffmann and Albrecht in the years around about 1900. So certainly, I think he's a really important part of that European tradition that comes out of the arts and crafts into modernism in the 1920s onwards.
thank you.
Right. Who else in the audience have persistently had their hands up that I have overlooked?
Maybe one more.
We have one child's question.
Very good.
And Sophia's question is, did they have any children?
No. Sadly, they did not have any children. No.
Good, she said.
No. But they did have family, and until recently there was descendants of the family still around, but largely not now. It was a long time ago. But no, sadly, they themselves never had children.
Hi, I saw, by the way, thank you so much. I saw that in the sketches, there seemed to be a concept for landscaping that went beyond. Yeah. Could you elaborate a little bit on the landscaping and context of it?
This is quite a frustrating area, because for an architect who's and designer whose everything that he designed was really inspired by organic forms, paintings, chairs, the relationship. I talked about the bladderback chair as a trellis to a sort of stencil of roses. And although the drawing that I showed you of the Hill House looks like it's got quite an elaborate and considered garden design, that doesn't really seem to have ever been executed in any way, as far as we know. And so one of the projects that is going on in the restoration of the Hill House is doing some research into, to the extent that the garden design was ever implemented. But in fact, he did very little design which was out in the natural landscape, despite being so influenced by nature.
This is an online question from Robert. Robert, I'm going to paraphrase your question, but basically, if one wanted to support Hill House, the Scottish National Trust, how would one go about that?
What a wonderful question to finish on, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Robert, for that most welcome question. Our overall project, not just to restore the Hill House, but also to develop this wider project, which will restore the reputation of Mackintosh and Macdonald and help to inspire creativity from their amazing example, is a project that will cost about £20 million sterling. We're on our way with that. Lottery in the UK have given us a very generous grant. I know there are people in this room who have already supported us. But we've got a long way to go on that, and I hope that you agree that it's a great cause, because it's about the care of the heritage, which is, yes, it's far away in Scotland, but it is of such importance, as I said, that it's part of all of our world's heritage, and we believe and we hope that people will be generous enough and kind enough to support us from around the world. The National Trust for Scotland, USA Foundation, is your conduit to your generosity. No support is too small, no support is too large. And I'm just going to ask Kirsten Bridier, who's the wonderful Executive Director of our National Trust for Scotland USA Foundation, just to quickly stand up and just and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, thanks Phil. You can learn more about the project and support our work at ntsusa.org. So that stands for National Trust for Scotland Foundation USA. Yeah, we would be grateful for any interest.
Thank you. Even though you rounded up things in such a wonderful way, maybe we'll still take a few more questions, if that would be okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So who is someone who's right? There we go.
So you mentioned the vegetation as a design feature, and I noticed in the pictures that were of the Hill House, there were some trees, bushes, and everything. Is that part of Mackintosh's design, or was that done by someone else or later? Or?
Yeah, it's part of the design, to the extent that that was the drawing that he produced, this beautiful presentation drawing. But as far as we know, it wasn't really ever implemented quite in that way. And so we would like to find out more about whether, to what extent it was implemented, whether there may be more information that might help us understand this, and to look at whether it would be something that we could instate or reinstate as we get on with the project. It's a research project as much as a project on site, and that is part of the work that we'd like to look at.
I'm going to take one more online question, and I apologize to our online audience if I didn't get to your question, and then we'll take one more question from the audience. This is from George. Are there many original furniture items in the house? I know that Thomas Hargarth has contributed some.
Yes, the house is still largely complete with the furniture that Mackintosh designed for it, which is one of the reasons why it is such an exceptional experience. But when you visit it, you'll also see that there is some of the Blackie's own furniture, which is Victorian and looks completely out of place, but was probably quite comfortable by comparison. One of the research projects that we are doing is to see whether we can locate any furniture and other designs that were in the house, which moved on over the years. Wouldn't it be a very exciting thing if we could discover anything that was lost from the house and see whether we could acquire it and reinstate it in the house? And Mackintosh material does come up on the market quite regularly. There's some wonderful things coming up through the Scottish Auction House line in Turnbull. End of next week, actually, if anyone wants a bit of Mackintosh themselves. Although, first of all, of course, I would encourage you to support our conservation project at the same time. But things do come up; they do appear on the market, because although the number of design commissions overall were quite small, the amount of design that went into them was an extraordinary amount. And so, in that way, he was very prolific. Whether it was menu cards or cutlery or umbrella stands, you name it. I mean, they did everything for these buildings.
The final question
if in this wider audience there are people there who would like to join in this heroic project, I think is a good opportunity to get in touch, as we've seen with our Phil and the rest of the team. They do a fantastic job. We do, without what happens in North America, I don't think things could be done quite as well as they are, and it opens the door to you visiting Scotland and visiting the Heritage Centre. This is a straight sell, not Polaine and Turnbull, my company, but just, I'd like a round of applause for those people that have supported it. And anyone who wants to join in, please do.
Thank you. Let me just see. So you said that several families had lived in the house over the years, and I was just wondering if you had any stories of how they found living in a total art environment. What did they bring in?
Well, I was lucky to meet one of the remaining Blackie family members recently. She came to an event that we had when we took responsibility for the Willow Tea Rooms in Glasgow. And she has amazing memories of living in the house. I think from the 1950s, in the last years that they were there, and they remembered it very fondly. There's all sorts of special nooks and crannies in the house where it was possible for young people, children, to put on plays. And it's a very livable domestic environment. I'd move in a minute. So I think it was a very, very happy family home, but I think that the families realised as time moved on into the 60s and 70s that it was something of such extraordinary importance that it needed to be cared for into the future, and it posed such challenges to look after because of the design of it, that it would be a good thing if it came into an organisation that could do that. And so I'm very proud that it's our responsibility. It's a big challenge to get it sorted so we can make sure that it is always there for future generations. But as my voice is going, I'm going to thank you for that last question and say, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you have an opportunity to visit the Hill House. And certainly, if you felt able to get involved and support us in our ambition, I would be absolutely delighted to. Thank you very much again for coming this evening.
Philip, again, yes, we won't let you go quite yet. But you don't have to talk very much more. But again, we want to express our huge appreciation for your eloquent talk and thought-provoking, and it's really wonderful to see that you've been using to find out about the innovative conservation techniques you are in the process of using. So thank you so much, and for coming all the way over from Scotland to share this with us. So our huge appreciation, and just to say a few more words before we release you for the wine and the reception, is our Executive Director, Victoria Dengle.
Yes, and I'll be brief. Philip, thank you so much. That was delightful. Loved every minute of it. And I do want to say that, this attention to Scottish heritage and not only abroad, but here in New York, which Camilla Hellman has greatly assisted with and champions the cause and all of this wonderful history. And more personally for us, and some of you may have heard it before, but Andrew Carnegie in 1903 donated $250,000, which we put to good use, to build this library and construct 3 floors on top of the building. We did it in about 2 years' time, about $8.9 million in today's money. That would not do what was accomplished then, the $8.9 million. And talk about conservation, even in 1903 with the addition being built, with Ralph Townsend was the architect, they did conserve the windows. So those used to look out onto 43rd Street, and one of the windows became a door that pivots. So there's a lot to look at upstairs. And people always think of historic preservation as a more modern term, and they've been conducting it for years. Your work is important. We love working with the American Scottish Foundation. And John Mossman, I recently found out, who bequeathed us those locks, 350 locks, he was also a Scot. So I see that. And happy Tartan Week. Thank you.
Again, I want to express our appreciation to the National Trust for Scotland Foundation and for their staff being here this evening. Thank you. And of course to Camilla of the American Scottish Foundation. We greatly appreciate all your help, and to our audience. We're just going to make a brief presentation to you. Yes, to you, yes. Well, the poster.
Do you remember, I'm sorry, Hey Jude, it seemed to never end. I think it's happening.
We would like to present a poster to you as a little memento. Right.
It's such a lovely experience.
Right. Our absolute pleasure. I hope we'll see you back for a very different topic on Tuesday, April 29th, pigeons. Love them or love them? We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much again, Philip. Our great appreciation. Thank you.